Something felt off about their lack of knowledge regarding his war hero status and the approaching military convoy. This was meant to be nothing more than a simple journey. Walter Jennings pressed against the wind while traveling along Highway 17 near Summerville, South Carolina. His Harley rumbled beneath him, its wheels gripping the asphalt, as if understanding his natural pace. He had no urgent destination today. Sunday belonged to him, the single day when no obligations bound him to anyone else. Not the Veterans Affairs Office, not his neighbor's broken fence repair, not the local children who constantly inquired about his military insignia and decorations. Just himself, the open road, and that familiar route he'd traveled every weekend for 12 years. At 52, Walter was a retired Army veteran who had served in Desert Storm, completing 21 years of service across 5 deployments. He carried 2 damaged knees and kept a Purple Heart hidden in a drawer he never accessed. He wasn't someone who felt compelled to discuss his past experiences, but his history was evident in his bearing, in his steady gaze when others became agitated, and in the quiet self-control that made him rise at 5:30 each morning without fail. His weathered leather vest accompanied him on every ride, worn but durable, displaying his former unit's patch on the back, along with his familiar cap, the identical one he wore when departing the military base permanently. Desert Storm veteran was stitched in golden thread across it. Typically, people would offer salutes, nods, or waves, but today proved different. As he navigated a gentle curve approaching the town's edge, he noticed 2 police cruisers positioned across from a service station, their front ends facing the highway. Walter maintained his speed without deviation, keeping his pace consistent and proper. He observed one patrol car pulling out, followed by the second, as emergency lights activated behind him. He signaled his intention, moved to the roadside, shut off his engine, and placed his hands on the handlebars, exactly as he had instructed returning veterans. Avoid giving officers reasons for concern, move deliberately, show respect, and remain composed. A young officer emerged first, tall, approximately 30 years old, with a precise haircut, reflective sunglasses, and a stride suggesting he'd been anticipating catching someone in wrongdoing all day. His partner remained in their vehicle. Documentation and registration, the initial officer demanded, already approaching with his hand positioned near his duty belt. Walter complied wordlessly, even providing his military identification as an additional precaution. The officer examined both documents and raised his eyebrows. "What's your point of origin?" "My residence. Location. Ladson took the scenic route." "Your destination?" "National Guard facility on Lincoln Highway. I'm scheduled to present at 3 o'clock. The officer glanced toward his partner before moving closer. "You match the description of someone we're seeking." Walter tilted his head slightly. "Which individual?" "African-American male operating a black motorcycle, wearing a vest." Walter examined his dark motorcycle, then himself, releasing a humorless chuckle. "Well, you've identified me," he responded. "You've narrowed your search to half the state's population." The officer found no amusement in the remark. "I need you to dismount the motorcycle, sir." Walter remained motionless, without arguing, simply observing the man before him, before asking a single question. "Is this your standard treatment for everyone carrying veteran identification, or exclusively those who resemble me?" The resulting silence was sharp, but the officer provided no response. Instead, he gestured for his partner to approach. However, something about Walter's observation of them, calm, still, and completely self-possessed, made them sense they might no longer be controlling the situation. The second officer approached slowly, unhurried, shorter and stockier, perhaps slightly older than his colleague. His gaze moved from Walter to the Harley, then to the identification still held by his partner. "Everything verified?" he inquired. "License plates clean, license matches," the first officer muttered. "Then why is he still roadside?" the second asked quietly, keeping his eyes on Walter. "Because he's being uncooperative." Walter raised his eyebrows. "By responding to your inquiries and providing everything you requested?" The first officer didn't reply, already circling the motorcycle, examining the license plates, saddlebags, even inspecting the tires as if expecting something to emerge. Walter remained still, feet planted, arms relaxed, eyes tracking every movement. His pulse remained steady. This wasn't his first unwarranted traffic stop, but it was his first experience of such disrespect while representing his service. The younger officer radioed something using code numbers Walter recognized from his military police experience. Suspicious vehicle, possible match, requesting update. While protocol, his tone and delivery weren't about following procedures. They were about proving something. "Do you reside locally?" the second officer asked. Walter nodded. 20 minutes east. Purchased the house in 2002. Paid in full. "Your employment?" "I served," Walter replied. "Now I speak, mentor, and help train new recruits at the guard facility. Today's the same. Scheduled appearance at 3, or was supposed to be." The second officer paused. He didn't vocalize it, but his expression revealed his thoughts. This man doesn't fit the profile. The motorcycle was pristine, the man composed, his record clean, but they had already committed, made a stop, detained someone, and retreating would mean acknowledging potential error. That's when the situation shifted. The first officer returned holding Walter's wallet and something else, Walter's military ID. "You claim you're scheduled to deliver a speech today, correct?" The officer examined it carefully. "Why don't we verify that?" Walter blinked once. "You have my name, my identification. Do you truly need to confirm my invitation to speak at my former unit?" "Standard procedure," the younger officer stated. "Just performing our duties." Walter let that statement hang in the air. "So was I," he said, "for 21 years. But we didn't treat people this way." Silence settled over the group. Vehicles passed in the opposite direction. A pickup truck honked once as it rolled by, the driver slowing enough to observe. The first officer activated his radio again. "This is Unit 37, requesting name verification. Walter Jennings, Jenings, cross-reference with local military installations." Walter exhaled forcefully through his nose. He understood how these situations could escalate, how quickly a routine stop could become something no one wanted to discuss later. He wasn't frightened, but he was weary, and more importantly, running late. "May I contact the facility?" Walter asked. "To inform them I'm delayed?" The first officer shook his head. "Not until we complete our verification." Walter's phone vibrated once in his vest pocket. He looked down without reaching for it. Knowing the caller, he'd missed check-in, and Captain Brooks was likely searching for him now. But what the officers didn't realize, and what Walter already understood, was that someone would soon come looking, and they wouldn't arrive alone. Captain Elijah Brooks checked his timepiece for the third time in 5 minutes. It was 2:47 p.m., and Walter Jennings was never tardy, not once, ever. Elijah stood outside Building 2 at the Florence Army National Guard training facility, watching soldiers assemble in the hall where Walter was scheduled to speak. The event was informal. Mentorship, leadership, post-service transition guidance, topics Walter knew intimately, the kind of presentation younger soldiers anticipated and needed to hear. But now there was no sign of him, no message, no call. Captain Brooks scanned the parking area again, jaw tense. He wasn't just Walter's commanding officer now. He had once served under Walter years ago, before rank and title. Walter had been there the first time Elijah broke down during pre-deployment exercises, pulling him aside not to reprimand but to remind him he wasn't broken, just human. That kind of man doesn't simply forget commitments. Inside, Sergeant First Class Reggie Dunlap approached with a clipboard. Still no communication? Elijah shook his head. Motorcycle trouble, perhaps? Reggie suggested. Elijah gazed toward the long stretch of road beyond the gates. Not with Jennings. If he had a flat tire, he'd push that bike 30 miles before letting anyone think he abandoned us. Then Elijah remembered something, the check-in system. Every soldier speaking on base had GPS tracking linked to their security badge, even former personnel. It was passive monitoring for safety, mostly ignored until someone was over 30 minutes late. He turned to Reggie. Access Jennings's GPS tag. Let's locate him. Reggie blinked. You think it's that serious? Do it. 2 minutes later, Elijah stared at the screen. Walter's last tracked location, the shoulder of Highway 17, 6 miles from the county line. That's not his usual route, Elijah said, his voice suddenly low. You think he had an accident? No, Elijah replied. He's not moving, but the tag remains active. That means he's on his feet. Another pause. Or being made to stand. Reggie looked up. You think he was stopped? Elijah didn't answer, his mind already racing. Prepare 2 transports, he said. Full squad in uniform. Keep it tight, keep it clean, but move. Sir? Do it! Elijah's voice wasn't angry, it was focused. He wouldn't allow one of his own to be humiliated, not on his watch, not after everything Walter had contributed. By the time the trucks departed, there were 30 soldiers strong, not in protest, not in anger, but in support. En route, Elijah contacted the rest, 15 additional troops from a nearby logistics team, 2 officers from headquarters. One by one, they answered the call. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. Walter wasn't just a man in a vest on a Harley. He was their man. And wherever he was, whoever thought they could treat him as if he didn't matter was about to understand exactly what Walter Jennings meant to the uniform. But by the time the convoy neared the gas station where Walter stood, a crowd had already begun forming, and the officers still hadn't determined who they were dealing with. People had started gathering. A few had pulled into the gas station lot across the road, watching from behind their windshields. One man stood recording with his phone just outside the nearby barbershop door. Word was spreading rapidly, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, too quiet. An African-American man standing beside a parked motorcycle, being questioned by 2 officers who couldn't quite explain why he was still being detained. Walter hadn't moved an inch. His arms were crossed now, legs slightly apart, calm, stoic, the kind of composure that unsettles people who think they're in control. The first officer kept glancing over his shoulder, radio still clipped to his chest, voice low every time he checked for updates on the supposed burglary suspect. But nothing was returning because there was nothing to match. Then the sound arrived, low, deep, a growl of engines. Not 1, not 2, but a wave. At first, the officers didn't react, assuming it was a convoy or perhaps some construction crew passing through. But then they saw it. Dust rising from the highway's edge, Humvees rolling in formation. Military. Not 1, not 3, but 9, then 11, then more. Over 50 soldiers in full uniform, seated in convoy formation, approaching directly toward them. Flags on the lead vehicle, the kind of procession that makes you pause and forget where you are. The barbershop observer stopped filming. Now everyone was watching. The lead Humvee pulled up and stopped right there on the shoulder. The door opened slowly. Captain Elijah Brooks stepped out, his boots touching pavement like he owned it. Not arrogant, just steady, straight-backed, commanding. He didn't shout, didn't need to. The two officers blinked hard, one instinctively touching his belt's edge. Walter smiled just slightly. Elijah walked straight past both officers and stopped in front of Walter. "You all right, sir?" he asked, voice calm. Walter nodded. "Was waiting on you." The crowd was quiet now, tense. Even the birds seemed to stop. Elijah turned to face the officers who were still frozen in place, eyes bouncing between the convoy and the man they'd pulled over. "You the ones who stopped this man?" Elijah asked. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Yes, we had a report, a possible match. Description fit." "Really?" Elijah stepped forward once. "You ran his ID?" "Yes, it checked out." "You got his name?" "Yes." "And after all that, you kept him here. Why?" The officer glanced at his partner. "Protocol, just trying to do our job." "Your job," Elijah repeated. Then he pointed to the crowd. "Your job put a war veteran on display like a thief. You think that's protocol?" The second officer stepped forward, attempting to recover. "We didn't know who he was." Elijah leaned in. "He served longer than you've been alive. Led soldiers, built bridges, saved lives. And today he was invited here to lead again. You think that ball cap's just for show?" Neither officer said anything. Elijah shook his head and stepped back toward Walter. "You ready to go, sir?" Walter smiled wider now. "Been ready." But before he moved, Walter turned to the crowd. People with phones out, people pretending not to stare but couldn't look away. He took one slow step toward the officers. Not aggressive, just honest. "You could have asked me anything," he said, "and I would have answered with respect. You didn't need to pull rank. You didn't need to assume. You didn't need to hold me here like I was a danger, because I'm not." He looked them in the eye. "I've been through things you can't even imagine, fought so people like you could wear that badge. But what hurts most is that you looked at me and didn't see a man. You just saw a profile." Silence. Then someone from the crowd clapped, just one, then another. Then the barbershop door opened and a voice shouted, "Tell it like it is, brother." The officers didn't respond. They didn't know how, but the town had seen enough, and they'd remember this, not because of how it started, but because of how it ended. The soldiers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. As Walter walked toward the lead Humvee, Elijah opened the passenger side door himself, a small gesture, but everyone watching knew what it meant. Respect, the kind that couldn't be faked or forced, the kind that had been earned long before any of them arrived. Walter paused before stepping in. He turned back one last time, eyes sweeping over the crowd, the patrol cars, the officers who were now quietly retreating to the curb, like furniture being moved out of the way. The young officer's face was flushed, maybe with shame, maybe confusion, but the damage was done. This wasn't about a mistake anymore. It was about what that mistake revealed. Across the street, someone yelled out, "What's his name?" Walter smiled faintly. "Walter Jennings," he said loud enough for the whole block to hear. "Army retired, still standing." Another voice from near the gas station, "Thank you for your service." And then more claps, from truck drivers, from teenagers on bikes, from the woman behind the gas station register, who had come out with her apron still on. The younger officer finally stepped forward again, slower this time. I didn't mean to disrespect you," he said. "I was following the report, that's all." Walter looked at him, not with anger, but not with pity either. He said nothing for a moment, then, "The problem's not just the report. It's what you expected me to be when you saw me. You already made your decision." The second officer lowered his eyes. Captain Brooks stepped forward. Let this be the last time you treat someone like their history means nothing. That badge isn't just about control, it's about judgment. And if your judgment fails you, you need to ask yourself why. Another pause, and then something no one expected. Walter reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was his speech, creased now, a little crumpled, but legible. He handed it to the second officer. "Read it sometime," he said. "Might teach you something they didn't cover in training." Then he climbed into the Humvee and shut the door. The engines rumbled to life again. The convoy moved slowly, deliberately through the neighborhood. People waved, saluted, filmed, but nobody said another word until the last vehicle passed. Back at the scene, the officers stood there, not quite sure what to do with themselves, and across the street, a child turned to his mom and asked, "Why'd they stop that man?" She didn't answer right away, but her face said plenty, because that was the question everyone would be asking for days to come, and not just in that town. The training session still went on that day. Walter arrived nearly an hour late, but when he walked into the building, the room rose to its feet, not out of ceremony, out of love, out of respect. Some of the young soldiers had already seen the footage on their phones. Others had heard the story pass through the hallways, but no one asked for an explanation. They just knew. Walter didn't rush. He didn't skip ahead in his notes. He stood there, center of the room, same crumpled speech in his hand, and he spoke, not just about service, not just about duty, but about dignity. He talked about how every man and woman who wears a uniform, no matter what color their skin is, deserves to be treated like their sacrifices meant something. He reminded them that real strength doesn't come from barking orders or flashing power. It comes from how you treat people when no one's watching. And then he said something none of them would forget. It's not always war that leaves scars. Sometimes it's the way you're seen when the fighting's over. The room fell silent. Even Elijah, who had heard Walter speak a dozen times before, felt a knot in his chest, because the truth hit different now. Later that week, the video from the gas station made the rounds online, not for clicks or outrage, but because of what it represented. A man who stood tall without raising his voice. A group of soldiers who showed up not for a fight, but to protect a legacy and a town forced to look itself in the mirror. The police department issued a formal apology. Some called it too little, too late. Others said it was a start. But Walter never commented on it. He wasn't looking for headlines, he was looking for change. A few weeks later, the younger officer, Officer Gavin Trent, showed up at one of Walter's free community talks, sat in the back, listened, took notes, and afterward he waited until everyone had gone. "I read your speech," he said, "all of it." Walter nodded, didn't say a word. "I didn't know what I was doing out there, not really. I was just going off what I was taught. But what you said about seeing people." He paused, looking down at the floor. "I see you now." Walter looked him in the eye. "I hope you see yourself too." That moment didn't fix everything. It didn't erase history, but it mattered, because sometimes the smallest cracks are how the light gets in. And for every man or woman who's ever been looked past, talked down to, or treated like their story didn't matter, Walter Jennings reminded them, "You're more than a description. You are a whole life, and you deserve to be seen." If you're watching this and it hit you somewhere deep, share this story, not just online, but in conversation, in community, in how you move in this world. Someone like Walter might be riding next to you,